She was 23, working a diner shift, $60 short on her brother's school fees, when a stranger sat down across from her and said 4 words that changed everything. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd just been standing 3 feet from the wrong conversation on a Thursday night, and that was enough to put her in the crosshairs of something far bigger than she ever imagined. What unfolded in the hours after her shift ended will stay with you long after it's over. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The lunch rush at Miller's roadside had a rhythm to it. Coffee cups clinking, the low drone of country music from the corner speaker, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum, and Emily Carter moving through all of it like she'd been born for the job. She hadn't, but she was good at it, and being good at something that paid was enough for now. She was 23, though most days she felt older. She'd been working doubles at Miller's for going on 2 years, long enough to know every regular by name, every bad tipper by face, and every troublemaker by posture before they even opened their mouth. That last skill had come naturally, sharpened by necessity. You didn't grow up the way Emily had, bouncing between her mother's unreliable care and her grandmother's cramped apartment, without learning to read a room fast. She slid 2 plates of eggs and toast onto the table in booth 4, refilled the coffee for the couple in the window seat, and mentally ran through the math she'd been running all week. Liam's school needed the activity fee by Friday. The electric bill was already 12 days late, her car insurance renewed at the end of the month. She'd picked up an extra shift Thursday, but it still came up short by about $60. $60. The number sat heavy in her chest as she smiled at a table of truckers and asked if they needed anything else. "Just the check, sweetheart." She wrote it up, tucked it under the syrup dispenser, and moved on. That was the job. Keep moving, stay pleasant, be invisible when needed, and present when required. Most days it came easy. Today something kept snagging her attention. She noticed them the way she noticed anything off, quietly, sideways, without staring. 3 men in the corner booth. They weren't loud or messy. They weren't drunk, though it was barely past noon. They weren't particularly memorable in the way they looked. Average builds, plain clothes, nothing that should have registered. But something about them didn't fit the diner crowd, and Emily's gut had stopped letting her ignore things that didn't fit a long time ago. For one thing, they'd been there 40 minutes and hadn't eaten. One of them had a coffee cup in front of him, but he hadn't taken a sip in 20 minutes. Just stirred it slowly, the spoon going around and around. His eyes, though. His eyes weren't on the coffee. They moved to the window, then back to the room, then to her. Not obviously. Not in the leering way she'd learned to shut down before it started. More like cataloging. Like he was building a map of the diner, and she was one of the points on it. The second man had a menu open, but hadn't called for a server. The third sat with his back to the wall, facing the door, not speaking, just watching. Emily moved past their booth twice without stopping. On the third pass, she leaned in with a practiced smile. "You gentlemen ready to order?" "Still deciding," the stirring coffee one said. No smile back. Just those eyes, briefly on her face, then gone. She walked away without pressing it. Table 4 needed ketchup. Table 7 had a kid making a mess. She had a job to do. The bell above the door chimed at 12:43. She registered him before she fully looked up, the way you register a shift in temperature or the sudden stillness in a room. A tall man stepped inside, and he did something nobody else had done when they walked through that door. He paused, not from indecision, not searching for someone, but still, taking in the space. 3 seconds of absolute stillness, and then he moved. He was black, looked to be in his late 40s, broad-shouldered but not imposing, in the way that made you edge sideways. He wore dark jeans and a plain charcoal jacket. Nothing remarkable. But the way he moved through the diner was different from the way normal people moved. Most people walk into a space and let it happen around them. This man walked through space like he was in conversation with it. He took a booth near the back, not the very back, 2 tables from it. His seat faced the entrance and both exits. Emily noticed because she always noticed where people sat. It told you things. He picked up the menu, scanned it in about 15 seconds, and set it back down. When she came over, he ordered black coffee, nothing else, and his eyes were courteous when they met hers. Polite, a present, then moved away. She filled his cup and left. 20 seconds later, she caught herself glancing back at him. He wasn't looking at the men in the corner booth. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the window beside his table, but it was angled, and the reflection in it gave a clear view of the entire diner, including the corner booth. The stirring coffee man had gone still. Emily refilled a water glass at the table nearest the corner booth, not because it needed filling, but because her feet had carried her there on instinct. She kept her face open, bored, professional, tilted the pitcher, let the water pour, and heard, low and clipped between 2 of them. After her shift, a pause, then the other one, back exit, no noise. The pitcher trembled slightly in her hand. She steadied it before anyone could see. She walked back to the serving station and set the pitcher down with deliberate care. Her mouth was dry. Her skin had gone that tight, prickling kind of cold. She told herself she'd misheard, told herself she was stressed, stretched thin, that her brain was dramatizing fragments of an overheard phone call or a conversation that had nothing to do with her. But her hands were shaking. She thought about it while she brought out a BLT for table 9. After her shift, back exit, no noise. She turned the words over, trying to find another way to fit them together, a way that didn't point at her. There were 3 other waitresses on shift today. Maybe it was about one of them. Maybe she was being ridiculous. She glanced at the corner booth. The 3rd man, the one who'd been sitting with his back to the wall, had shifted his position. His body now faced a slightly different angle, facing her direction. Her heart was doing something fast and uneven. She kept her face neutral. She carried the check to table 3, laughed at something a regular said, and looped back to the serving station. Normal. Normal. Keep it normal. The lone man's table was in her line of sight. She wasn't sure when she'd started watching for it, but when she passed his table with a rack of glasses, she saw his hand move, deliberate. 2 slow taps on the rim of his coffee cup. Then, still again. She almost kept walking. She stopped herself just short of it. Something in the precision of that gesture, not accidental, not fidgeting, made her breath go thin. She circled back to his table on the pretense of checking his coffee. She didn't speak, neither did he, at first. She reached for his cup. And he let her refill it, and just as she turned to go, his voice came quiet as a fold in fabric. Stay calm. A beat. You're in danger. She went very still. Pretend I'm your dad. For a moment, the whole diner seemed to tilt sideways. The clinking of silverware, the low music, the distant sound of someone calling an order through the kitchen window. It all went muffled and strange. She stared at him. He didn't look up from the table. She had about 4 seconds to process what he'd said before he straightened in his seat, expanded his presence somehow without moving more than an inch, and spoke in a carrying tone. Sit down, Emily. Firm. Familiar. The voice of someone who'd said that sentence to her 100 times. We need to talk. Her name. He knew her name. She sat down. It wasn't a conscious decision. What her legs made it before her brain did, folding under her as she slid into the seat across from him. She realized distantly that her name was on her name tag, but the way he'd said it, weighted, tired, certain, had nothing to do with reading a tag. It sounded earned. Her eyes cut to the corner booth. The 2 remaining men there had both looked over. She pulled her attention back before she could confirm what she feared was on their faces. The man across from her folded his hands on the table, unhurried. He had the kind of stillness that didn't read as vacant. It read as controlled, like the stillness of a rope pulled tight, not one that's gone slack. He met her eyes for the first time straight on. His were dark and steady, and there wasn't a trace of panic in them. No urgency she could name, just awareness, deep, thorough, and calm. That calm was the most frightening thing she'd encountered all day. The man's name was Daniel. He gave it without ceremony, barely moving his lips when he said it, and then he launched into something that should have felt absurd, but didn't. "You didn't return any of my calls this week," he said, louder now. Tired father energy. Exasperated, but restrained. The specific frequency of a parent who's been disappointed enough times to stop raising his voice about it. "I had to drive all the way out here, Emily." She opened her mouth, closed it. He gave her the smallest possible nod. "Go with it." She swallowed. "I've been busy." "You're always busy." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Not forceful, deliberate, like a weight set down with care. To the room, it would read as a parent's gesture. To her, in that moment, it was something else entirely. Her pulse had been scattered and high, and his hand was warm and grounded, and without understanding why, she felt it pull something in her chest back into alignment. Not safe, but focused. She didn't pull away. He leaned back slightly, shaking his head with a believable look of resignation. "I don't know what you're doing with your life right now, but this—" A vague gesture at the diner, meant to look paternal and disappointed. "This is not it." She found her footing. "I have responsibilities." "I know you do. That's why I'm here." It was strange how quickly the scaffolding went up between them, how naturally she started responding to his cues. He'd drop a phrase that gave her a thread, and she'd follow it. He'd shift the subject when he needed her to shift. She was good at reading people, and he was good at leading them, and together the scene had a strange, unsettling coherence. She was aware of the corner booth. She didn't look directly at it, but she saw it in her periphery. The two remaining men had adjusted. One had moved closer, not to their table, but within the radius of it. The other sat with his body turned outward, watching the room. Daniel saw it too. She knew he did, because when he lifted his coffee cup, his gaze moved in a slow arc that had nothing to do with thirst. "They were expecting you to leave alone," he said, low enough that even the empty table beside them wouldn't have caught it. "Now they're recalculating." Her stomach turned. "So it's real." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her manager, Connie, appeared at the edge of the dining floor, he eyebrows raised and pointing at the check that needed running and the table waiting to be cleared. The look was not unfriendly, but it was direct. Emily felt the pull of it, routine, obligation, the mechanics of her regular day. She started to rise. She's on break. Daniel said it calmly, without looking up, without raising his voice. Just stated it like a fact that had been long established. Connie blinked. There was a beat, the kind where a person recalibrates. Something in his tone hadn't left much space for debate. She gave Emily a questioning look, and Emily nodded once, tightly, hoping it came across as, "Family issue, just give me a minute," and not, "I am currently terrified." Connie moved on. Emily breathed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet." One of the men from the corner booth stood up. He stretched, easy and casual, like a man who'd been sitting too long and needed to move. Then he walked, unhurried, circuitous, toward their table. His approach was designed to look incidental. He stopped just close enough to lean against the nearest empty table, and when he spoke, his voice had the practiced lightness of someone who'd rehearsed it. "Hey, sorry to interrupt." His eyes skimmed over Emily with a speed she felt in her skin. "You know if there's a gas station nearby?" "GPS keeps giving me grief." Daniel looked up. The look he gave the man was level and unremarkable, and contained something in it that Emily couldn't fully name. Not aggression, not hostility, but a kind of bedrock certainty that made the air in the immediate vicinity feel different. 3 miles west on the main road, Daniel said. That was all. The man held the moment. Stayed another 2 or 3 seconds, long enough to make a point that nobody could prove he was making, then pushed off the table with a short nod and turned away. Emily tracked him back to his booth without moving her head. He said something brief to the second man. The second man didn't respond visibly, just adjusted his posture. She looked at Daniel. Who are they? People who've been watching you for longer than today. He said it without drama, the same register as the rest of his sentences. That was somehow worse than if he'd whispered it. This isn't something that started when you came into work this morning. She made herself take a breath. How long? Long enough that they know your schedule, your exits, whether you usually walk to your car alone. The diner noise continued around them. Someone laughed at a table near the window. The kitchen bell dinged. Emily sat in the middle of all that ordinary sound and felt a wall going up around her, not of safety, but of isolation, like she was watching the normal world through glass. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Why did you—" She stopped herself from asking, "How do you know my name?" again, because the name tag answered that, and because she sensed the more important question was the other one. Why did you get involved? He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking. Because I know what I was looking at when I walked in that door, and I know what happens when nobody does anything. That answer didn't explain everything, but it explained enough to keep her in the seat. She glanced toward the back of the diner, toward the corridor that led to the kitchen, the break room, the rear exit. The exit that the men had mentioned, back exit, no noise. "My shift ends in 40 minutes, she said. "I know." She looked at him. "Were you planning to still be here in 40 minutes? "I was planning to make sure you were." Something in her chest shifted. Not relief. She was nowhere close to relief. But something. Like the difference between falling and knowing someone is watching you fall. "You know this is insane," she said. "Yes." "I don't know you." "I know. And you're sitting here telling me strangers are planning to take me through a back exit, and I'm just supposed to— what? Trust you instead?" He met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to stay calm and follow my lead, because your options right now are limited, and I'm the better one." She looked at him for a long beat. Then she looked at the corner booth. Then she looked back at him. She hated that he was right. "Okay," she said. "What do I do?" He didn't smile, didn't nod with satisfaction, just refocused, like they'd cleared a minor logistical point and moved to the next one. "You keep acting normal. Talk to me like we've had this argument before. Don't look at them directly, and don't check your phone in a way that looks like you're calling for help, because they'll see it." She straightened slightly, reset her shoulders, found the shape of the performance they'd been building together, and slipped back into it. "You always do this," she said, slightly louder. "Drive out here without calling first. You don't answer your calls." "I'm working." "You're always working." The corner booth had gone quiet. She didn't look. She didn't need to. The absence of movement from that direction felt like attention held, not lost. Daniel shifted, reaching into his jacket pocket like he was looking for his wallet, and murmured without changing his expression, "They're watching closer now. That's not bad. It means the cover is working. Stay with it." She stayed with it. They kept the back and forth going, low-key, domestic in its tension, completely believable to anyone who glanced over. Meanwhile, she was tracking the room in her peripheral vision without appearing to, cataloging exits the way she'd never had reason to before, and trying to control her breathing. "Daniel." She said his name for the first time. It felt strange in her mouth. "This isn't random, is it? This was They picked me specifically. He set his coffee cup down. What makes you say that? Because you said they know my schedule, my exits. She kept her voice low and level. That's not opportunistic. That's planned. He looked at her across the table. In his eyes, she saw something that might have been assessment or respect, or both. He said nothing, but he didn't look away. I've been having a weird week, she said. I thought I was just stressed. There was a car near my building that I kept seeing. Someone called the diner, asking what time I finished on Tuesday. She paused. I didn't connect them. People don't, not until they have reason to. I have reason to now. Yes, he said quietly. You do. She exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled. What happens when my shift ends? We don't let your shift end on their terms. He glanced toward the entrance once, quick, professional. We're going to leave, together, before your scheduled time so they're not prepared for it. And when we do, we walk out the front, calmly, like I'm dropping you somewhere before your shift resumes, not like we're leaving. My manager, I'll handle it if it comes up. My stuff is in the back. Leave it. She thought of her bag, her phone charger, the $10 she'd left in her coat pocket. She thought of all the things she was about to leave behind because a stranger told her to. She thought of back exit, no noise, and she left them. Okay, she said again, quieter this time, more real. He gave her the smallest, most contained nod. Almost nothing, but there, an acknowledgement. The diner hummed around them. Someone asked for a refill. The kitchen bell rang again. Normal sounds from a normal afternoon in a world that had, for Emily Carter, stopped being normal sometime around her third loop past the corner booth. She looked at her hands on the table. They weren't shaking anymore. She didn't know what was waiting on the other side of this. She didn't know who Daniel really was, or how deep the thing he was describing went, or what it would mean for the rest of her day, her life. But she knew the men in the corner booth had said, back exit, no noise, and she knew Daniel had shown up and said, stay calm. And she knew that between the two, only one of them had sat down across from her like she was something worth protecting. For now, that was enough. She straightened in her seat, reset her face, found her voice. You know, she said louder back in the scene, you could have just texted. You would have ignored it. Probably, she admitted. And for one surreal second, in the middle of all of it, something almost like a smile crossed her face, brief and involuntary, and then gone. The corner booth stirred, Daniel noticed. Almost time, he said quietly, not looking at her. She nodded once, hands flat on the table, eyes forward. She was ready. The plan was simple. Leave through the front early. Calm, together. Emily knew that. She'd agreed to it. But as she sat across from Daniel in that booth, the diner noise pressing in from every direction, something else was pressing in too. A quieter, more insistent thing. A reel she hadn't meant to play, running backward through the last 7 days. The car. A dark blue sedan parked on the street opposite her building 3 mornings in a row. She'd noticed it the first time because it was blocking the hydrant, and she'd half expected a ticket by the time she came home that evening. But the ticket never came, and the car was still there the next morning, and the morning after, and then on the 4th day, it was gone. She'd told herself the owner had finally sorted it out. She hadn't looked twice. The phone call. Tuesday, someone had called the diner and asked Connie what time Emily's shift ended. Connie had mentioned it in passing. Some guy asking after you, with the mild, unbothered tone of someone who assumed it was a family member or a friend running late. Emily had felt a small ripple of unease and then let it dissolve under the weight of the lunch rush. She hadn't brought it up again. The man outside the pharmacy. Thursday evening. She'd gone in for Liam's allergy prescription and come out to find a man standing near the entrance, not blocking it, not doing anything wrong, just standing. He'd looked at her. Not a long look, not a threatening one, but specific. The kind of look that knows who it's looking at. She'd walked to her car faster than usual and told herself she was being paranoid. Women told themselves that constantly. It was practically a reflex. Now, sitting across from Daniel, she laid those three things side by side in her mind and felt something shift behind her sternum. Not fear. Something colder than fear. Recognition. "It's been a week," she said quietly. "At least." Daniel hadn't asked. He seemed to understand she was working through something, and he let her work. "Car outside my building, someone calling to check my schedule. A man at the pharmacy who—" She stopped, started again. "I thought I was being anxious. I wrote it off." "That's what they count on," he said, low, not unkind. "Incremental exposure. They make themselves present just enough to become background noise before they make their move." She looked at him. "You've seen this before." It wasn't really a question. Everything about the way he'd walked through that door, sat down, read the room. It spoke to a fluency that didn't come from reading about something. It came from having lived inside it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I spent over 20 years doing work that most people don't have clearance to know about. Part of that work was understanding how operations like this one function, the surveillance patterns, the timing, the selection criteria." "Selection criteria," she repeated. Yet the words sat in her mouth wrong. Clinical. Cold. "Young women," he said carefully, "usually between 19 and 25, living alone or close to it, predictable schedules, limited immediate support network." She thought of Liam at home. 16, good kid, spent most afternoons on his school assignments and texting his friends. Her grandmother was in Greenville, too far to be practical backup. Her mother was her mother. There was no one else she'd call in an emergency who could actually get to her in under an hour. "I fit the profile," she said. "Yes." The word landed without softening. She appreciated that more than she would have appreciated an attempt at comfort. This wasn't a situation for comfort. This was a situation for facts. "So I wasn't—" She steadied herself. "This wasn't random. Someone looked at my life and decided I was a good candidate." "Correct." She pressed her hands flat against the table. The vinyl was cool beneath her palms. For a long moment she just breathed, in and out, measuring it, and let the thing she was feeling move through her fully rather than trying to contain it before it arrived. It wasn't grief exactly. It wasn't quite rage. It was something in between, a slow, burning clarity, like a lens coming into focus on an image you realize you've been half-seeing for years. They thought she was easy, isolated and overlooked, and unlikely to put up enough resistance to complicate the plan. They had watched her schedule, her exits, her patterns, and they had decided she was manageable. The anger that followed that thought was clean and quiet and absolute. "Okay," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "What do we do?" Daniel's eyes moved to her face. A brief, sharp look, like he was calibrating something. Then he said, "First, Liam." The name came out of her before she'd finished the thought. She sat up straight, heart rate spiking clean through the controlled breathing she'd been working on. "My brother, he's home. He's 16. He's home alone, and if they've been watching me, then they know. Take a breath." "Daniel." "Emily." His voice was quiet, but it cut through cleanly. "I hear you. We're going to address it. But I need you focused, not spinning. Take a breath." She took the breath. It cost her something. "He's alone." "How long has he been home?" "Since 3. School lets out at 3. She checked the clock on the wall behind his shoulder. 4:18. He texted me at lunch, but I haven't checked my phone since the floor got busy. She started to reach for it. Slowly, Daniel said, like you're checking the time. Don't look urgent. She drew her phone from her apron pocket, glanced at the screen the way someone checks the time out of mild boredom. No new messages from Liam. Nothing alarming in itself. He often didn't text between school and dinner. But the absence of it now, in the context of everything else, felt loud. No messages, she said. Daniel processed this visibly. She could see it. The small recalibration, the way his eyes moved to the middle distance and returned with a slightly different set to them. He was restructuring something, reweighing priorities. That changes the order of things, he said. Tell me how. We still leave together. We still leave calm. But we don't go to a secondary location first. We go to your brother. Is that safe? If they know where I live, going directly has risk. Not going has more. He was already thinking forward, she could tell. And we don't go in through the front. We'll figure out the approach when we're closer. In the corner booth, the energy had changed again. The man who'd wandered over to ask about the gas station had returned to his seat. Now, all three were present, and none of them were pretending to look at menus. The stirring had stopped. They weren't bothering with the props anymore. Emily felt the shift before she identified it, like barometric pressure dropping before rain. They're done waiting, she said. Daniel had already seen it. Yes. So the timing just moved up. It did. She felt the diner around her differently now, not as a familiar, safe place she'd worked for 2 years, but as a physical problem to be solved. She knew the floor plan by instinct. The front door, 8 tables to the left, the counter, 4 stools, the corridor to the kitchen and break room at the back, the rear exit through the kitchen, which opened into the service alley behind the building. The side window in the break room faced the parking lot. That rear exit was where they'd planned for her. She looked at the front door, thought about the distance between the corner booth and the entrance, measured it in steps without meaning to. I know this building better than they do, she said. Daniel looked at her. Tell me. The back exit goes through the kitchen. The kitchen crew will be in there. There's a dinner prep window starting around 4:30. The alley behind connects to the side street, not the main lot. She paused. But that's where they said to take me. So, not that way. Front, he confirmed. Together. You remove your apron slowly, not rushing, and we stand and walk to the door like I'm leaving and walking you out. My manager might... Don't stop. Don't explain. If she says anything, you say you'll be right back. He looked at her steadily. You won't, but that's not what matters right now. She nodded. Her hands moved to the strings of her apron. She began to loosen them, slow, like she had all the time in the world, like this was the most ordinary thing. She thought about Liam at home. She thought about the blue sedan outside her building. She thought about the fact that someone had studied her life and decided it was takeable. Her hands stopped shaking. She folded her apron neatly and set it on the seat beside her. She met Daniel's eyes across the table. I'm ready, she said, and she meant it. He stood first. She followed. Side by side, not hurrying, they moved toward the front of the diner, and the men in the corner booth rose from their seats. Every step toward the door had weight in it. Emily kept her pace even, her shoulders back, her face in the neutral expression of someone finishing a break and walking a family member out. She had spent 2 years learning to look unbothered in a room full of people demanding things from her. That skill had never been more useful than it was right now. Daniel moved beside her, not in front, not behind, beside, and close enough that their arms nearly touched. She could feel the steadiness coming off him like something physical, a frequency rather than a warmth, and she matched her steps to his without thinking about it. She didn't look at the corner booth directly. She didn't have to. In her peripheral vision, she tracked the movement, two men rising, a shift in the room's weight, and felt her pulse kick hard once before she controlled it back down. The distance to the front door was maybe 30 feet. It felt like considerably more. They were 12 feet out when the man stepped into their path. He appeared from the left side, not from the corner booth, which meant he'd been positioned there already, or had moved earlier, and she hadn't caught it. He was the middle-height one, plain jacket, the one who'd been watching the room rather than her specifically. Up close, he had an easy, almost relaxed look on his face, the particular expression of someone who doesn't need to make effort because the situation has already been arranged in their favor. "Leaving so soon," he said. Light, conversational, like he was catching up with old acquaintances. The front door was directly behind him. Emily felt Daniel's pace change beside her. Not slow, just recalibrate. A single beat of adjustment, and then he was fully present to the situation in a way that hadn't been visible from the booth. "Move," Daniel said. One word, no elevation in his voice, no hardening. It didn't need either. It came from somewhere below emotion, a register that didn't invite discussion, just a clear statement of what was going to happen. The man didn't move. His easy expression didn't shift, but something in his eyes changed, a small recalibration, assessing what he was actually dealing with. "Sir, I just want to have a word with—" He reached for Emily's arm. It happened very quickly. Later, she would try to reconstruct the sequence and find it difficult, not because it was chaotic, but because it was so precise that her brain had trouble separating the steps. Daniel's hand came up and intercepted the man's wrist before contact was made. A turn, a downward redirect, controlled, economical, the kind of movement that knew exactly what it was doing and used only as much force as the task required. The man's arm was twisted into an angle that made further action involuntary, and in the same motion Daniel stepped between him and Emily, he putting his body in the space where the confrontation had been. The man dropped. Not dramatically, he went down onto one knee, the arm useless, and stayed there for a moment processing what had just happened. The diner erupted, not violently, but the way a space does when something wrong enters it suddenly and everyone feels it at once. A woman at the counter made a sharp sound. Chairs scraped back. Someone at table 3 grabbed their kid and stood. A plate hit the floor in the kitchen doorway and shattered, though whether that was related was hard to say. "Go," Daniel said, his hand at her back, not grabbing, directing, guiding pressure. She went. They covered the last 12 feet to the door in seconds. She pushed through the glass, felt the outside air hit her, cool, slightly overcast. The particular smell of a late afternoon in a commercial stretch, exhaust and concrete and fast food from the place 2 doors down. For 1/2 second it felt like escape. Then she saw the vehicles. 2 of them, positioned in the diner's small lot. Not parked the way customers parked, angled, blocking the 2 logical exit paths from the front entrance. Black SUV on the left, boxy and high-riding. A second vehicle beside it, a sedan she didn't recognize. Between the cars and the entrance, 3 men, different from the ones inside. They were already on their feet, already moving into position. She stopped. Daniel stepped out beside her and took in the lot in approximately 2 seconds. She watched his face during those 2 seconds. It didn't fall, it didn't do anything dramatic, but something settled into it, a recognition, a recalculation. "That's not a small crew," she said. Her voice came out even, which surprised her. "No," he agreed. The men from the vehicles hadn't rushed them. They were fanning out slowly, deliberately, covering the angles, making a rush for the street impractical without going through at least 2 of them. One of them spoke into something at his collar. There was a network to this, communication, coordination. Behind them, through the glass door, she could hear the diner's interior noise still unsettled. Raised voices, movement, the specific acoustic texture of a public space mid-disruption. The man Daniel had dropped would be back on his feet. The others from the corner booth would be moving toward the exit. They had maybe 40 seconds before the situation closed completely. She looked left. When the side of the diner building ran along a narrow service path, not quite an alley, but a gap of maybe 6 feet between the building and the fence of the property next door, used for deliveries and maintenance. She'd walked down at once to help a delivery driver who'd pulled too far past the kitchen entrance. At the far end, it connected to a side street that ran perpendicular to the main road. She grabbed Daniel's sleeve. Left, side path. It runs through to the street behind. He looked where she pointed, looked at the men in the lot, made the calculation in under a second. How far? Maybe 80 feet. There's a gate at the end. It's not usually locked. Usually. Usually, she confirmed. He moved. She matched him without hesitation. They cut left along the building, staying close to the wall. Not running, not yet, and moving at the sharp edge between casual and urgent. She heard one of the men from the lot call out behind them, short and clipped. Then the sound of footsteps accelerating. Then they were in the service path and running. The path was narrow and uneven, cracked asphalt, a pair of metal trash cans, a stack of empty produce crates from the diner's weekly delivery. Emily's work shoes weren't built for this. She caught the edge of a crate with her foot and stumbled, and Daniel's hand was there, her upper arm, steadying, not slowing. She recovered and kept running. Behind them, the footsteps echoed differently in the confined space. Louder, multiplied. More than one person. She didn't look back. The fence gate came into view at the end of the path. Chain link, latch handle, the kind that rusted and complained but usually opened. Usually. She hit it 2 steps ahead of Daniel and shoved the handle down and pushed. It swung open. They came through onto a side street. Residential adjacent, no sidewalks, parked cars along one edge. Emily's lungs were working hard. The air tasted like cold iron. Daniel pulled the gate shut behind them and looked both ways along the street in that same fast, methodical way, reading it, assessing. "Walk," he said, "same pace as anyone else out here." She understood why. Running drew eyes. Running meant something was wrong, and wrong meant someone calling 911, which in another situation would be exactly what you wanted, but right now meant stopping, explaining, waiting for response time while the people behind them closed the distance. She forced her body into a walk. Her legs resisted. The side street was quiet. 2 people further down. A woman walking a dog, a kid on a bicycle turning the corner ahead. Nobody watching them specifically. From behind the fence, she heard voices. 2 of the men had entered the service path. Not running, they'd also understood that running drew attention, but close. Daniel set a pace, brisk but controlled, and she matched it. They walked half a block in silence. Emily's heart rate was still high, but the kind of high that was functional, that gave her clarity rather than taking it. "The gate will buy us maybe a minute," Daniel said without turning his head. "Then what?" "Then we need distance and cover, in that order." She thought while she walked. She knew this area, not intimately, but adequately. 2 years of commuting to and from the diner had built a working map of the surrounding streets. There was a small residential stretch 1 block north, houses with side yards and enough visual obstruction to break a sight line. Beyond that, a commercial block, dry cleaner, barber shop, a mechanic's place she'd passed 100 times without ever going in. "There's a mechanic shop," she said. "Weston Auto, a block and a half north. I've seen it every shift for 2 years. There's always at least 1 person inside, sometimes 2, the owner and an older guy who does the heavy work." Daniel considered this as they moved. "You know them?" "I know their faces. They get coffee from us sometimes. The owner, heavy-set guy, gray beard, he's never seemed—" She searched for the right word. "Unfriendly." "Mechanic shops have back exits," Daniel said. It wasn't really to her, more like verifying the logic aloud. Low foot traffic. Room to think. "And tools," she added. in case anyone wants to argue about it. He glanced at her sideways, a look she couldn't fully interpret. They turned north. The street widened slightly, lined with older houses set back from the sidewalk, deep yards, broad-trunked trees beginning to show the early push of spring. The light was getting lower, late afternoon turning toward early evening, the sky the layered gray gold of a sun behind clouds. Emily's breathing was leveling out. Her mind, though, was still running. "The man from the lot," she said. "He was talking into his collar. They have radios or something." "Earpieces," Daniel said, "which means whoever organized this has eyes on more than the diner." "So they could already know which direction we went." "Possibly, which is why we're not going to your apartment directly, even though I know that's what you want to do." She said nothing because he was right, and she resented it. "Liam is safer if we approach correctly than if we go in blind and lead them straight to him." His voice was even. "Give me 10 minutes to think and we'll move on him, okay?" She looked at him as they walked. Everything about this man was still unfamiliar. His full name, his history, the specifics of what he'd actually done in those 20-plus years he'd mentioned. She'd known him for less than 2 hours. She'd sat across from him in a booth while he held her hand and scolded her about phone calls, and she'd played along because her gut had told her she had no better option. Her gut had not, so far, led her wrong. "Okay," she said. Weston Auto appeared on the left, a low cinder-block building with 2 bay doors, one closed and one open. An older truck was lifted on a hydraulic rack inside. The sign above the entrance was faded blue on white. A small hand-lettered card in the window said open until 6. Daniel pushed open the door. The interior smelled like oil and old rubber and solvent, a dense, honest smell that made the space feel enclosed and solid. One fluorescent tube overhead buzzed faintly. An older man in gray coveralls stood at a workbench along the back wall, half-turned as they came in. He had a wrench in his hand and reading glasses pushed up on his head. He looked at Daniel first. Something moved between them, brief and wordless. Daniel spoke to him in a low, quick murmur. She caught "friend of Ray's" and 10 minutes and "we need the back" and nothing else. The older man looked at Emily, then back at Daniel. He then set down the wrench and gestured toward a door at the back of the shop. They moved through it into a small room, a break space barely, with a plastic folding table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a half-dead plant on the windowsill. A single window looked out onto the rear of the property, a concrete pad, and a rusted chain-link fence beyond it. Emily sat down, let herself breathe for real for the first time since the diner. "Okay," she said. The adrenaline was finding its edges, tapering. "Tell me what you need to tell me." Daniel stood by the window, looking out at the back of the property, not at her. "You saw something. That's why you're on their list." She frowned. "What?" "It wasn't just the profile. There had to be a trigger." He turned from the window. "Think back. The last week or 10 days. Was there anything at the diner that didn't belong? Something you saw or heard that struck you as wrong?" She was already reaching back, mentally scrolling through shifts and tables and faces. The week had been long and repetitive, and... She stopped. "Last Thursday," she said slowly. "Late shift. Maybe 9:30, 10. Guy came in, sat at the counter. He was on his phone the whole time. Not unusual. But he was talking quietly, and he seemed tense. More than tense. He kept watching the door. What did you hear?" "I wasn't trying to hear anything. I was refilling the napkin dispensers." She pressed her memory. He said a location, 2 words. I can't remember what exactly. A street, maybe, or a name that sounded like a place, and something about a shipment and a date. She looked up. "I thought it was a work call." "I didn't think anything of it." Daniel was very still. "I refilled his coffee and he paid and left. I forgot about it in an hour." She felt the weight of it settling over her. But he saw me there, while he was on the phone. And now you're not just someone who fits a profile, Daniel said carefully. You're someone who might be able to identify a voice, a face, a fragment of information. She heard the word before he said it. You're a loose end, he confirmed. The room felt smaller than it had 30 seconds ago. She pressed her hands together. Thought about Liam, home, no answer on his phone, 16 years old and spending his Thursday evening the way he always did. Homework, probably, or a game. Unaware that his sister's accidental presence near a phone conversation had redirected the aim of something organized and ruthless onto their lives. Then we go to him, she said. Now. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. Her voice had the same quality Daniel's had when he'd said move to the man in the diner doorway. Not loud, not hard, just free of alternatives. He looked at her, and this time she saw it clearly, that brief, calibrating look she'd seen twice before, like he was updating what he knew about her. They'll expect that, he said, which means we don't go direct. So we're smart about it, she said. Fine. Tell me how. He opened his mouth to respond and stopped. The older man in the next room had moved. Emily registered it because Daniel registered it. His posture shifted, and she followed his attention through the cracked door to the main room. The mechanic had drifted to the far corner of the shop. His back was to them. His phone was in his hand. He wasn't making a call exactly. He was standing at the window, looking out at the street, fingers moving on the screen. She watched him for 3 seconds. Daniel's voice dropped to almost nothing. We need to leave. Now. She was already standing. The window of the break room faced the rear lot. She looked at Daniel, looked at the window, looked at the door. He'd already made the same calculation. He crossed to the window in 2 steps, checked the view. The concrete pad was clear. The gate at the back of the lot was standing open, and unlatched the window. From the front of the shop, through the cinder block walls, she heard the sound of a vehicle pulling up outside. Engine, then quiet. They went out the window. The concrete was cold under her palms as she came through feet first, landing with a controlled sound, Daniel beside her in the same motion. They moved across the rear lot without speaking, through the open gate, and out onto the service lane behind the property. She didn't look back. Behind them, she heard the front door of the shop open. A voice she didn't recognize, asking a question she didn't catch. They walked fast, heads down, into the gathering evening. The city ahead of them, the threat behind, and somewhere out there, her brother's apartment light probably already on, the television probably on, a 16-year-old sitting in what he assumed was safety. Daniel exhaled once, controlled, and as they cleared the lane and hit the next street. This just got bigger, he said, not in a way that sounded lost, more like a man who'd already started adjusting to the new coordinates. She looked at him, looked at the street ahead, thought about everything she now knew, the profile, the surveillance, the fragment of phone call she'd overheard without knowing it mattered, the mechanic who'd just sold their location without blinking. They were not escaping anymore. She had understood that the moment she'd seen the vehicles in the diner lot, the coordination, the coverage, the radio at the collar. This wasn't a handful of men acting on opportunity. It was layered, resourced, and patient. And she was standing in the middle of it because she'd been within earshot of someone's phone call while refilling napkin dispensers on a Thursday night. She thought about that girl who'd written off the blue sedan and the pharmacy stranger and the call to the diner. She'd never be that girl again. Okay, she said, walking forward. What's next? The service lane behind Weston Auto was barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Cracked concrete, a rusted dumpster pushed against one wall, weeds splitting the ground along the fence line. The evening air had dropped several degrees since Emily had walked into Miller's that morning, and the chill moved through her uniform like it had nothing to stop it. She kept moving. Daniel set the pace. Not running, not quite walking. Something in between, the speed of someone with somewhere to be. Ordinary enough to read as unremarkable to anyone watching from a window or a passing car. She matched him without being told to. The mechanic's shop was half a block behind them now, and she didn't look back at it. Looking back never helped. They made contact with someone inside that shop in under 10 minutes, she said, keeping her voice low. Maybe less. Daniel's eyes were moving, left, right, checking the gap between buildings ahead, reading a parked van for signs of occupation. Could be standing protocol, report any unusual visitors. How many people does this operation have on payroll? Enough to be uncomfortable about. He turned them right at the end of the lane onto a quiet side street. Stop thinking about the scale for now. Scale is a problem for later. Right now, we need distance, a direction. And we need to know Liam is okay. Hearing her brother's name out loud in his voice did something to her chest, tightened it, then released it into something sharper. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket, remembered she'd left the apron on the booth seat, then looked down and realized she'd taken it after all. She must have grabbed it automatically when she stood, muscle memory from 2 years of tying and untying it at the end of every shift. It was bunched in her left hand. She still had her phone. She dialed Liam. It rang 4 times. Then his voicemail, casual and slightly bored sounding the way teenage voicemails always were. "Hey, it's Liam. Leave a message or whatever." She kept her voice normal. "Hey, just checking in. Call me when you get this, okay?" She ended the call and looked at Daniel. "He doesn't always answer," she said. "He'll see it and call back." "How long does that usually take?" 10 minutes if he's into something, less if he's bored. She paused. "He's probably fine." "He probably is," Daniel agreed. "But we act on the assumption that he isn't, because assumption is cheaper than the alternative." She understood that. She hated it, and she understood it. They came out onto a wider residential street. Oak trees along the parkway, older houses with deep front porches, a kid's bike dropped on its side in one yard. The neighborhood had that specific late afternoon stillness of a place where most people were inside now, dinner being made, televisions turned on. Normal evening sounds filtering through closed windows. It felt almost bizarre to walk through it. "We need a direction," she said. We can't just keep moving without one." "I know. And I need to know what direction is actually safe, because the mechanic shop was supposed to be safe." He didn't argue with that. He walked 2 more paces in silence, and she could see him working through something, not stalling, actually working. She'd learned the difference between those things in the last 2 hours. "The people behind this," he said eventually, "are going to have eyes on transit hubs, bus stops near your apartment, the main roads in and out of your neighborhood, anywhere obvious." He glanced at her. "Did you walk to work this morning?" "No, I drove. My car's still in the diner's lot." "Which they'll be watching." He nodded to himself. "That's fine. We don't need your car." He pulled his own phone and checked something briefly. "There's a school 2 blocks east of here. Schools have fields, and fields have multiple exit points and low vehicle access. We move through it and come out on the far side." She looked at him. "You've been mapping this neighborhood since we left the diner." "I've been mapping this neighborhood since I walked into the diner," he corrected. She absorbed that. "You saw me before I saw you." "I saw them before I saw you. You came second." He said it without apology. It was just a sequence of events. They turned east. The neighborhood thinned slightly, houses giving way to a strip of older retail, a dry cleaner, a cell phone repair place with a neon sign, a corner store with a hand-painted logo above the door. A few people moving along the sidewalk, heads down in their phones, unremarkable. Nobody looking at Emily and Daniel with anything more than the absolute minimum of awareness that strangers give each other on city streets. She nearly tripped over an uneven section of sidewalk, heaved up by a tree root pushing through from below. Her foot caught the edge and she pitched forward, shoulder dropping, and caught herself with her next step before it turned into a fall. She kept moving. "You're doing well," Daniel said quietly. Not as encouragement, more like a field assessment. Matter of fact. "I'm running in work shoes," she said. "I know. They're not built for this. I know that too." Something about the exchange steadied her oddly. The absurdity of it, running from an organized trafficking operation in non-slip restaurant shoes, discussing it like it was a logistical inconvenience. She almost made a sound that might have been a laugh if the situation had been different. Liam called back. She answered before the second ring. "Hey. Hey!" His voice was normal, slightly distracted, the specific distraction of someone mid-game or mid-video. "What's up?" "Nothing, just..." She kept her voice carefully easy. "Are you home?" "Yeah." "Are the doors locked?" A pause. She could hear him recalibrate slightly. "Why? Are you okay?" "Yes. I just want you to check the doors and keep them locked, okay? Don't answer if someone knocks unless it's someone you know." Another pause, longer. What's going on?" She looked at Daniel. He gave her nothing, no signal, no instruction. This one was hers. "I can't explain right now, but I need you to stay inside and keep the doors locked and don't open them for anyone, okay? I need you to just do that for me." She heard him move, heard the shift of his weight, the small sounds of him taking her seriously, in the way he usually resisted, but always eventually did when her voice carried a certain quality. "Okay," he said. A beat. "Are you coming home?" "Yes, not yet, but yes. I'll call you before I do." "Okay." Another beat, quieter now. "You're scaring me a little bit." "I know. I'm sorry. Just stay inside." She breathed. "I love you." "Yeah, me too." He sounded like a kid for a second, not 16, but younger. It made something in her throat tighten so hard it was almost physical. She ended the call. Daniel said nothing for a moment. Then, "Good. He's scared. But he's inside and he'll stay that way." He glanced at her. "That's what matters." "For now," she said. "For now," he agreed. The school appeared ahead, a mid-sized public elementary, single-story brick, playground equipment visible along the left side, a wide athletic field stretching behind it. The main gate was locked, as expected after hours, but the side fence that bordered the residential street behind had a section where the chain link bowed outward at the bottom, the kind of gap that generations of kids had widened over years of using it as a shortcut. Daniel crouched, held the fence up, looked at her. She went through without discussion. He followed. The field was empty, just cut grass and the specific quiet of a school after hours, that echo of noise that wasn't quite there anymore. They crossed it diagonally, moving with purpose, and Emily felt the openness of it around her. No walls to pin you. Clear sight lines in every direction. And she understood why he'd chosen it. They were 2/3 across when she looked back automatically. And stopped. Two men had entered the field through the main gate, not through the gap in the fence, through the gate, which meant it had been opened for them from outside, which meant someone with access or someone with bolt cutters and very little time wasted. "Daniel." "I see them. They came through the gate." "I know." He didn't break stride. Faster now, not running, faster. She lengthened her steps. The far fence was 60 feet ahead, another gap at the bottom corner. She could see it from here. Same vintage, same patient widening. Behind them, the two men had also accelerated. The pretense of casualness was gone on both sides. "When we go through the fence," Daniel said, "there's a street. And across the street there's a row of townhouses. We go between the second and third buildings, and we don't stop moving until I say." "How do you know there's a gap between the second and third buildings?" "I looked at a map of this area this morning before I walked into the diner." She looked at him sideways at full stride. You knew this was going to happen today? I knew something was going to happen. I didn't know it would involve you specifically until I walked through the door and saw both you and them in the same room. So you just came here to watch? I've been tracking movement in this network for 6 weeks. The diner was a location that came up twice in intercepted communication. I came to observe. He glanced back once, a quick, controlled check. Observation became intervention. She filed all of that away, and now was not the time. They hit the fence and went through, her first low and fast, the chain link cold against her palms. She came up on the other side onto a narrow sidewalk, a quiet residential street beyond it. Across the road, the row of townhouses, exactly where he'd said. Second and third buildings. A narrow passage between them. Dark, partly blocked by a pushed-out recycling bin, but passable. They crossed the street without running, entered the passage. The sound of the field behind them dropped away, replaced by the tight acoustic of walls on either side, their own footsteps and their breathing. She became aware of how hard she was breathing. Her legs were talking to her in a language made of mild protest, the specific language of a body that hadn't signed up for this day. So they emerged from the passage into a small courtyard shared between the townhouse buildings, a laundry line strung between 2 posts, a child's plastic tricycle on its side, a low wall beyond which the next street began. Daniel stopped. She almost walked into him. "Here," he said, quietly, like they had chosen to stop and hadn't just stopped because the situation demanded it. She looked behind them. The passage was empty. She looked at the low wall, looked at Daniel, looked at her own hands, no longer shaking, just present, slightly cold. "Did we lose them?" she asked. "For now." He was listening, head angled slightly, the posture of someone with better calibrated attention than the average person. The townhouse corridor breaks line of sight. They'll have to go around the block to reacquire. How much time does that buy us? 3 minutes, maybe 4. She pressed her back against the wall of the townhouse and tipped her head back and looked at the sky. That slate-colored early evening above the roof lines, the first suggestion of stars not yet visible, but coming. She thought, "This morning I was worried about $60. She said, "What do we do with 4 minutes?" He was already thinking. She could see it. "I need to make a call," he said. "There's someone I can reach who has operational awareness of this area. Someone I trust." "Someone from before?" "Yes." "How far before?" He looked at her briefly. "Far enough that it matters." She didn't push it. She watched him pull his phone and move 2 steps away. Not for privacy, she sensed, but habit. The posture of someone who had spent years making calls in exactly this kind of moment, in exactly this kind of quiet, and had developed automatic physical rituals around it. He dialed. It answered on the second ring. She could hear the faint sound of a voice, but not the words. Daniel spoke in the same register he used for everything, low, unhurried, stripped to the essential. "It's me. I need eyes on a residential address. Northwest quadrant, block near Miller's Diner." He listened, said, I know what I'm asking. I need it in the next 20 minutes. A pause. Because a girl and her kid brother are running out of time. He listened for longer this time. She watched his face and read nothing dramatic on it, just that deep, quiet attention. Then he said, "Thank you," and ended the call. He turned back to her. 20 minutes, he said. "And then?" "And then we have someone on the ground near your building who can tell us what we're walking into before we walk into it." She exhaled, let herself feel the relief of that for approximately 3 seconds before putting it back in its compartment. "Okay," she said. "So we stay mobile for 20 minutes, and then we move on Liam." "Yes," she nodded. "Then we need somewhere to be for 20 minutes that isn't a field or a mechanic shop." He looked at her. "And this time, The faintest, most contained suggestion of something that acknowledged the weight of what she'd just said without dismissing it. "Working on it," he said. "They found 20 minutes in the back of a laundromat 3 streets over. The kind of place with outdated machines and a handwritten sign on the wall listing acceptable coins and a smell that was equal parts warm air and old detergent." There were 4 other people inside, a woman folding sheets with practiced, efficient movements, 2 men on the bench against the far wall watching something on a shared phone, and a teenager sitting cross-legged on a machine eating chips and looking at nothing in particular. Nobody looked up when Emily and Daniel came in. They sat on the bench near the back wall. Daniel faced the door. Emily sat beside him and looked at the floor and tried to put her thoughts in order. She was not the same person who had started her shift this morning. She could feel that distinction clearly now, not because of anything she'd done yet, but because of what she understood. There was a version of herself that existed this morning, running the floor at Miller's, mentally calculating the shortfall on Liam's activity fee. That Emily had noticed things and filed them away as coincidences and noise. The person sitting in this laundromat had the same facts, a different frame. "Tell me about the girl," she said. Daniel looked at her. "The one you mentioned earlier," she said. "Same signs, same setup. You got there too late." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to make you feel bad about it. I'm asking because you made a decision today based on what happened to her, and I want to understand what I'm inside of." He was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, gathering. "Her name was Tanya," he said. She was 21, working a diner, not so different from yours, in a city I'd been watching for 3 months. The indicators were there. I saw them in the pattern data before I even had eyes on her. Young, alone, routine, isolated, classic selection criteria. He stopped, started again. "I flagged it, put in a request for resources. The request went through the wrong channel and sat on a desk for 4 days. Emily said nothing. By the time I reached her, it had already moved past the point where reaching her was enough. He said it plainly, without dramatics. She survived, but surviving something and coming out of it whole aren't the same thing. I've known that ever since." He looked at the wall across from them, the handwritten sign, the out-of-order machine in the corner. "I left that work 18 months later. But I didn't stop watching." She understood then what he was, not just a former operative, a man with a wound that had taken the shape of a vigil, traveling, watching, tracking the edges of networks he no longer had institutional backing to dismantle. Acting when the moment aligned. "How often does the moment align?" she asked. "Not often enough." He looked at her, but today it did. She let that settle. Thought about Tanya, thought about herself, what her version of too late would have looked like if Daniel had ordered a full meal and taken his time or hadn't come in at all. The back exit. No noise. "You said this isn't just a crew," she said. "You said it's an operation. How big?" "Big enough to have a functioning surveillance network in this city. Big enough to have informants in civilian businesses." He paused. "Way big enough that there are people above the men in that diner who have never been in a diner." "Have you encountered this specific operation before?" "Adjacent to it. 6 weeks ago in another city, I picked up signals. Communication patterns, movement of certain vehicles, a name that came up twice. It pointed here. I followed it here." He shifted. "What you overheard in that diner last Thursday, Emily, the fragment about the location and the shipment and the date, that might be the thread that leads to the part of this operation that matters most." She thought about the man at the counter, the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd watched the door, the low, urgent voice that she'd half heard while stacking napkins. "I can't remember the location," she said, just that it sounded like a place name. 2 words. It might come back. Or it might not matter. There are other ways to trace it. He checked his phone. 15 minutes had passed. My contact should have something soon. She rubbed her hands together. The laundromat was warm, significantly warmer than the evening outside, and the warmth had a soporific quality that her body was trying to take advantage of. She resisted it. "The man on the phone at the diner," she said slowly. "He looked at me when I walked up to refill his coffee." "Yes." "So he reported me?" "Most likely, yes." "Described you, your shift pattern, your face?" He said it evenly. "Within 24 hours, you were on their list." "Because I was standing 3 feet away with a coffee pot." "Because you were standing 3 feet away with a coffee pot," he confirmed. She laughed, not from amusement, from the sheer compression of it. The pure randomness of the moment that had landed her here. A Thursday late shift, a slow hour, napkins to restock. She hadn't chosen to overhear anything. She hadn't done anything to attract anyone's attention. She had done her job. The laugh lasted about 2 seconds, and then it wasn't funny anymore. "If I hadn't heard anything," she said, "they still would have selected me for the profile." "Probably, eventually. The profile flags them to watch. What you heard made them move faster. So I was already on borrowed time." "Perhaps, but perhaps not. Profiles don't always convert to action. What you heard guaranteed action." He looked at her directly. "The reason I'm telling you this is not to frighten you more than necessary. It's because you deserve to understand exactly what you're in and why. You're not a passive piece of this situation. Yeah, you're a witness, a target, and now—" He paused. "Something else." She looked at him. "What's the something else?" "Someone who might be able to identify a face, a voice, a fragment of operational detail. If you testify to the right people, the right way, what you heard at that counter could contribute to dismantling something that will otherwise keep moving to the next city." The weight of that landed squarely. She felt it in her shoulders, a different kind of weight than the fear had been. This one had a different texture. Not a burden pressing down, but a thing with edges. Something you could pick up and carry differently if you chose. His phone buzzed. He answered it, listened without speaking for most of it, making one small sound of acknowledgement at a particular point. Then, "How many?" Another pause. A confirmed inside or observed approach. He nodded slowly. "Okay, don't engage. Just hold position and watch." He ended the call. He looked at Emily. She already felt it in the way he was looking at her. "Liam is okay," he said first. "He's inside and the doors are locked." She breathed. "But there are 2 men parked in a vehicle on the street facing your building's entrance. They've been there for approximately 30 minutes. The relief dissolved back into focus. "They're waiting for me to come home." "They're waiting for you, or they're waiting to confirm where Liam is so they can use him as leverage." He said it plainly because she could take it. "My contact has eyes on the vehicle from across the street. He'll stay until we move." "So they're watching the front entrance." Yes, she thought. She knew her building. She'd lived in it for 14 months, long enough to know the laundry room in the basement had a utility door that opened onto the narrow lot behind the building, used mainly for trash collection. The lot backed up to the alley that ran between her block and the next. The alley was accessible from the side street 1 block east. "There's a rear utility entrance," she said. "Ground floor, through the laundry room. The people in the front-facing vehicle won't have a sight line to it." He leaned in slightly. "What's the access?" "Resident key for the utility door. I have mine." She touched her pocket, felt the slight hard edge of the key ring she always kept, clipped to the inside of her apron pocket when she worked. Old habit, because she'd locked herself out twice in the first month. It opens onto a small lot. The lot backs up to an alley. "Accessible from the street?" 1 block east. There's no gate, just an open access point between 2 buildings." He was running through it. She could see the calculations happening. "They may have someone positioned at the rear," he said. "Standard protocol for a building watch would be front and back." "Then we need to know before we commit to the route," she said. "My contact can reposition. Give me 2 minutes." "We don't have a lot of those left." "I know." He was already dialing again. Brief exchange, 30 seconds. He described the alley access point, the lot, the utility entrance, asked for eyes repositioned to cover the rear approach. She heard the contact's voice, older, raspy, efficient, agree without debate. While they waited, she thought about what Daniel had said. Witness. The word had a shape to it. She had been inside dread for the past 3 hours, and the dread was still there, but something was shifting in how she was standing inside it. She had overheard 30 seconds of someone's phone call while doing her job. She hadn't asked for it, but she had it. And if what Daniel was suggesting was true, that the detail she'd caught could crack something open, then the randomness that had put her in danger was also the thing that made her matter. She wasn't just running away from something. She was running toward something, whether she'd chosen it or not. Liam had to be safe first. Everything else came after. Daniel's phone buzzed a 3rd time. He looked at the screen, a message, not a call. He read it, and she saw his eyes sharpen. "Rear lot is clear," he said. "No visible presence at the back." Either they don't know about the utility access, or they're understaffed on coverage tonight. "Or they're waiting until I actually show up," she said. "Possible, which is why we move in a way that doesn't announce itself." He stood. "My contact is repositioned to the mouth of the alley. He'll watch our approach and signal if anything changes." She stood with him. The laundromat had acquired a new person at some point in the last few minutes. A man in a canvas jacket, feeding quarters into one of the machines, paying them no attention. The woman with the sheets had gone. The teenager was still on the machine, still eating chips, looking at her phone now. Normal evening. Normal Tuesday. Daniel. She said his name the way she'd been saying it for the past 2 hours, without thinking about the strangeness of how well she knew it. When this is over, Liam and I, are we going to be okay? Long term, I mean. If I testify to whoever you think I should testify to, does that—" She stopped. "Does that make it worse? Are there more of them?" He looked at her for a moment. She could see him weighing honesty against reassurance, and she could see which one won. "There are more of them," he said, "but testifying through the right channels means institutional protection. It means you're not a loose end anymore. You're a protected witness. That changes the calculation for them significantly." "How significantly?" "Significantly enough." He held her gaze. "I won't tell you there's no risk, but I will tell you that the risk is smaller on the other side of this than it is in the middle of it. And we are currently in the middle of it." She nodded. Okay. Okay. She squared her shoulders, straightened her spine, put everything she'd learned about remaining functional under pressure, from years of working a diner floor, from the last 3 hours of this, behind her eyes. "Let's go get my brother." Something shifted in his face then, small and only there for a moment, and gone quickly. But she caught it, something between recognition and relief. Like a man who had spent a year and a half carrying something alone, feeling it distribute slightly. "We go east to the alley approach," he said, moving toward the laundromat door. "We take the alley to the rear lot. We go in through the utility entrance and up the back stairwell. We do not use the elevator, we do not knock before we open your door, and we get Liam, and we move. We do not stop to pack. We do not stop to explain. And we do not stop." She followed him to the door. "You've done this before," she said. "Exactly this." He pushed the door open. The evening air came in. Cold now, properly cold. The thin, early spring cold that found every gap in your clothes. "Different building," he said. "Different city." He looked at her over his shoulder. "Different outcome this time." They stepped out into the night. Ahead of them, 2 blocks east and 1 block north, Liam was inside with the doors locked, waiting for his sister to come home. Behind them, the operational reach of something far larger than any of them had considered when the day began. Beneath Emily's feet, the same city she'd walked for 2 years. Same sidewalks, same streets, same corner stores and parked cars and lit windows. None of it looked the same. She kept pace with Daniel, on shoulder to shoulder, and did not look back. "This isn't just a crew," he said, barely above a breath. "It's an operation, and we just stepped right into it." She thought about the profile, the surveillance, the Thursday phone call, the mechanic and his quiet reach for his phone, the vehicles in the diner lot, the earpiece at the collar. "Then we stepped through it," she said, and they moved. The alley behind Emily's block ran between 2 rows of buildings that had been built close enough together that the space between them stayed dark, even at midday. At 9 in the evening, it was a specific kind of dark, not complete, but layered, the ambient glow of lit windows above doing little more than defining the shape of things without illuminating them. She stayed close to the left wall as they moved through it, Daniel a half step ahead, his contact's last message sitting between them like a held breath. Front vehicle unchanged, rear lot still clear. For now. For now. Those 2 words had their own weight. They stopped at the mouth of the alley where it opened onto the small rear lot behind her building. Daniel crouched slightly and looked without moving into the open. She mirrored him, not because he'd asked her to, but because it was the right thing to do, and she knew it now without being told. The lot was narrow, 6 parking spaces, a dumpster enclosure on the right, the low concrete wall along the back. Her building's utility door was set into the far left corner of the building's rear face, a single fluorescent tube above it, buzzing with the mild indifference of municipal lighting. 2 of the parking spaces were occupied. Both cars she recognized as belonging to tenants. The lot was otherwise empty. "Those cars," she said quietly, "tenant vehicles. I've seen them for months." He scanned without responding for another 10 seconds. She'd learned to read those silences. They weren't absence, they were attention. He was mapping the angles, the shadows, the spots where someone could stand without being immediately visible. "Utility door is 30 feet across an open space," he said. "We cross directly, no hesitation, no looking around. Looking around is what draws eyes." "I know." He glanced at her. "I know you know." They crossed. The 30 feet took 7 seconds. She had her key ready before she reached the door, had dug it from the keyring clip while they were still in the alley. No fumbling, no pause. The lock turned on the first try. She pushed through, he followed. The door closed behind them with a soft, pressurized click. The laundry room was dim and smelled of fabric softener and the faint mineral smell of the old building's pipes. A row of machines on either side, most of them still. 1 dryer at the far end running a low tumbling cycle. Somebody's clothes, forgotten or left deliberately. The sound of it was oddly comforting, ordinary. She pointed to the door on the far wall. "Back stairwell, goes all the way up." He nodded. They moved through. The stairwell was concrete, painted gray, the paint wearing at the edges of each step, a single bulb per landing. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. They took the stairs without speaking, their footsteps absorbed by the thick building quiet around them. She counted the landings. 1st, 2nd. At the 2nd floor landing, she stopped. Daniel noticed immediately. "What?" She kept her voice to almost nothing. "When I was on the phone with Liam, he said he was home. He didn't say anything about anyone being in the hallway or anything strange outside the door." She paused. But he also wouldn't know what strange looked like tonight. Meaning he might have heard something and not flagged it. He's 16. He doesn't flag things the way I do. Daniel processed this. He looked up the stairwell, then at the door to the second-floor hallway, then back up. We go slow on the third-floor landing. I check the hallway before we come through the door. You stay on the stairwell side until I signal. She wanted to argue. She didn't. Okay. They took the last flight slowly, each step placed deliberately. Weight shifted forward to minimize contact noise. The building's old bones made sounds on their own schedule, a settling creak somewhere above, a pipe running somewhere behind the wall. Those sounds were useful. They covered the small, unavoidable noises of movement. Daniel reached the third-floor door first. He stopped with his hand on the handle and pressed his ear close to the door's edge without touching it, a gap of an inch, listening. She stood 2 steps below him and watched his face for what it told her. He held it for 30 seconds. Then he straightened minimally. He held up 2 fingers, pointed through the door, then pointed left. 2 people. Down the hallway to the left. Her apartment was to the right. She felt it move through her, that clean, cold thing that had replaced panic somewhere around the 3rd hour of this. She held up her hand, fingers spread. Her apartment? She pointed right. He shook his head. She read it as not at the apartment door, positioned in the hallway toward the left end, watching the elevator. Of course, they'd assumed she'd come through the front and take the elevator like she always did after a shift. They weren't covering the stairwell because they hadn't considered the stairwell. They didn't know this building the way she did. She moved up the last 2 steps to stand beside Daniel. He looked at her, put his hand flat, stay, and then eased the door open. 1 centimeter, 2. He looked through the gap with the specific focused blankness of someone processing information without reacting to it. He pulled the door to, turned to her. 3 fingers. She understood. 3 seconds. On his count. She gripped the door handle from her side. 1, 2, 3. They came through fast and quiet, the door swinging wide and then controlled so it didn't bang the wall. She turned right without hesitating, moving to her apartment door, key already in her other hand. Behind her she heard Daniel turn left, heard a sharp exchange of sound, the specific truncated noise of a confrontation that was over before it had a chance to become one. She hit her apartment door, slid the key in. The lock turned. Liam. She kept her voice low but put force behind it. It's me. She pushed inside. The apartment was lit. Living room light on, the small lamp by the couch that Liam always left burning when he was in his room. The television was going with the sound low. She could smell the remnants of the microwave dinner he'd made himself. He could see the container on the coffee table. Liam appeared in the doorway of his bedroom, still in his school clothes, looking at her with the expression of someone who'd been quietly dreading this moment since the phone call. M. He looked past her at the open door, the empty hallway. What's... Come here. She crossed to him, grabbed his arm, pulled him in. He was taller than her by 2 inches now, had been for almost a year, but he let himself be moved the way he'd let her move him since he was small. We're leaving, right now. Take your phone, your charger, whatever you can grab in 30 seconds. Don't pack a bag. Emily, what is happening? 30 seconds, Liam. Go. He went. She'd known he would. She moved through the apartment fast, her own phone charger from the kitchen counter, her small emergency envelope of cash from the kitchen drawer, the spare key. Her mind ran through what she was leaving, everything. Her whole ordinary life, the $60 shortfall, the electric bill, all of it sitting here in this apartment like a skin she'd stepped out of at 12:43 this afternoon. She heard Daniel in the hallway. She went to the door. The hallway was empty in both directions. Daniel stood close to the stairwell door, his back to the wall, watching the elevator indicator above the far door. He glanced at her, and she held up 1 finger. 1 minute, and he nodded. Liam appeared beside her with his jacket and his backpack half-zipped, phone sticking out of his front pocket. He looked at Daniel, and then at Emily with an expression she hadn't seen on him in years. A younger expression. I'd stripped of the practiced composure that teenagers constructed around themselves. Who is that? A person who is helping us. Don't ask anything else yet, okay? Just come. She watched him make a decision, the visible, deliberate decision of someone choosing to trust someone they love over every instinct to slow down and demand information. He zipped his backpack. Okay, he said. They went into the stairwell, down 3 flights, through the laundry room, out the utility door into the cold rear lot, crossing the same 30 feet she'd crossed 4 minutes ago, back into the alley. Daniel's phone buzzed once. He checked it without slowing. Showed it to her, a single word from his contact. Move, not a warning, a prompt. They moved. They came out of the alley's east end and turned south, away from the building. I'd away from the front-facing vehicle into the residential streets that ran parallel to her block. She kept one hand loosely on Liam's arm, not gripping, just present. He matched her pace without complaint. Daniel looked at both of them. One more move, he said, and then we're on the right side of this. She looked at him. What's the one more move? The person I've been building a case against for 6 weeks, he said. He's in this city, tonight, and your overheard conversation just told us where. She stopped walking. He turned. You said the location might come back to me, she said slowly. The 2 words from the phone call. Yes. She looked at the street, the pavement, the lit windows, and the parked cars, and the ordinary still city around them. She pulled the memory forward, the counter, the coffee pot, the man's tense shoulders. His voice low and quick, the words she'd caught in passing and filed away as noise. Harmon Yard, she said. It surfaced clean and certain, the way a submerged thing rises when the water above it goes still. That's what he said. Harmon Yard, and a date. He said Thursday. Daniel was very still. Tonight is Thursday, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. Then we're not running anymore, he said. Daniel made 2 calls in quick succession while they stood in the shelter of a deep doorway on the residential street. Liam beside Emily, close enough that their shoulders touched, both of them watching Daniel's face for information they couldn't get from the calls themselves. The calls were short. He listened more than he spoke. When he ended the second one, he turned to them with a settled look. Not satisfaction, not urgency, but the steady readiness of a person who has finally gotten everything he needs. My contact is bringing a vehicle, he said. 3 minutes. Where are we going? Emily asked. You are going somewhere secure, a contact location, not a safe house in the movie's sense, just a private address where you'll be off the street and unreachable. He looked at Liam. Both of you. Liam looked at Emily. She looked at Daniel. And you? I'm going to Harmon Yard. With who? People I called 6 weeks ago when I started tracking this. Investigators. Federal jurisdiction, the kind who have been building their own case from the institutional side while I've been building mine from the outside. He put his phone away. What you heard at that counter, Emily? The location, the date, a voice I can now tie to a description. That's the last piece they needed to move tonight. She processed this. So all of it, today, the diner, everything, it ends tonight. This piece of it ends tonight. He met her eyes. I told you before, there are more of them. This operation has reached beyond this city, but the people coordinating it locally, the ones who put you on a list, who put those men in the diner, who parked outside your building tonight, they'll be finished. That's enough, Liam said quietly. Both of them looked at him. He was looking at the ground, hands in his jacket pockets, jaw set. That's enough for tonight. She reached over and touched the back of his arm. A vehicle turned onto the street, a plain, dark sedan, unhurried, pulling up against the curb. So the window came down, and she saw an older man behind the wheel, gray-bearded, the same raspy efficiency she'd heard in Daniel's phone calls. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone they've been told about. Get in, Daniel said. She opened the rear door and guided Liam in ahead of her, then turned back to Daniel. He was standing on the sidewalk, and for the first time since she'd sat down across from him in that booth, the context around him had changed enough that she could see him differently. Not the man at the table in the diner, not the voice in her ear, not the hand on her arm guiding her through chaos. Just a man standing on a city street at night, carrying something old and heavy and his own. "You could come with us," she said. "No," he said. "I couldn't." She looked at him. "Is it going to be okay?" "At Harmon Yard." He considered the question seriously, the way he considered all questions. "Yes." "You're sure?" "I'm prepared," he said. "Which is better than sure." She wanted to say something that matched the weight of the day, something that captured what it was to have a stranger sit down across from her in a diner booth and say, "Stay calm and mean it," and then stay. But there was no sentence that covered it, and she suspected he would find a long one uncomfortable anyway. "Thank you," she said. It was small. It was also the only thing that was actually true. He nodded. One motion, final and complete. She got in the car. The contact, whose name turned out to be Walt, drove without conversation, which suited all three of them. Liam sat with his head against the window, not sleeping, just watching the city move past. Emily sat beside him and felt the adrenaline complete its long withdrawal, leaving behind something that wasn't quite exhaustion and wasn't quite calm. Something in between, like the feeling after a fever breaks, scraped clean and raw, and strangely awake. "Are you okay?" Liam asked, not looking away from the window. "Yes." "Were you scared?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes, but it didn't stop me from thinking." He was quiet for a moment. "Who is he?" "The man. His name is Daniel. He was in the military and then worked in investigations for a long time." She paused. "He saw what was happening today and he stepped in." "Why?" She thought about Tanya, about a desk and a 4-day delay, and a girl who survived something she shouldn't have had to survive. She thought about a man who'd walked away from the institutional work and kept watching anyway, on his own time, at his own cost, because not watching had once cost something he'd never fully set down. "Because he could," she said, "and because he's the kind of person who thinks that's reason enough." Liam processed this in the sideways way. He processed things that mattered, apparently setting them aside while actually storing them somewhere important. "Okay," he said. Walt pulled up outside a low apartment building on a quiet block 20 minutes from Emily's neighborhood. He handed her a key, plain, labeled with a unit number in marker, and told her the code for the building entrance, and said there was food in the unit and to keep the lights low. He said Daniel would be in contact before morning. And then he looked at her in the rearview mirror with an expression she couldn't fully name, somewhere between assessment and something older. "He doesn't do this lightly," Walt said. "In case you were wondering." She hadn't been wondering. She'd known that since the first 2 tap on a coffee cup. "I know," she said. The apartment was small and unremarkable. A couch, a kitchen table, a window with the blinds pulled. Liam found the food in the refrigerator and ate without being asked, which meant he was either genuinely hungry or managing his own nerves with action, and she loved him for both possibilities. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at her hands. There was still a diner shift to account for. Connie was probably furious or worried or both. The electric bill was still late. Liam's activity fee was still due Friday. The $60 shortfall hadn't resolved itself in the chaos of the last several hours. Life had a specific relentlessness that way. It didn't pause for the extraordinary. It just waited. But she was here. Liam was here. And somewhere across the city, at a place called Harmon Yard, the thing that had put those men in the corner booth of Miller's roadside was being taken apart by people who had the authority and the evidence to take it apart completely. She thought about the word Daniel had used. Witness. The shape of it. The edges of it. She'd be called on to describe a man at a counter. A voice on a phone. 2 words she hadn't meant to hear. It didn't feel like much. But Daniel had told her what it meant in the structure of the thing. It was the thread that tied a face to a location, to a date, to a federal case that was already built and waiting. You didn't need to carry the whole building. You just needed the right brick. She could do that. Liam came and sat across from her at the kitchen table, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand. He looked at her with his father's eyes. Their father, who had not been around for a long time, but whose eyes they'd both inherited and worn differently. Liam wore them openly. Emily had always kept hers a little more guarded. Not tonight, though. Tonight she was too tired to guard anything. "You're going to be okay, right?" he said. "Long term, this isn't." He stopped. "This isn't going to keep following us." "No," she said. It's not." "You sound sure." "I am." He studied her for a moment, the granola bar forgotten in his hand. "You're different," he said. "From this morning." She looked at him. "Is that bad?" He shook his head. "Just different." He paused. "Older." She thought about the Emily who had started her shift that morning, who had run the floor and smiled at tables and done the math on $60 and felt the particular low-grade exhaustion of a life running on discipline because anything else felt like collapse. That Emily had been capable, had been perceptive and tough and good under pressure. But she'd also been smaller in a way that was hard to name, hemmed in by the ordinary size of her circumstances. That hem was gone now. "Yeah," she said, "maybe a little." Her phone buzzed at 11:47, a number she didn't recognize. A message in plain language, no name attached. "It's done. Everyone accounted for. Sit tight, and a federal contact will reach you in the morning for a formal statement. You're protected. D." She read it twice, set the phone face down on the table. Liam was watching her. "Good news?" "Yes." He let out a breath that had clearly been sitting compressed in his chest for several hours. It came out long and slightly ragged and very young. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. He turned his palm up and held it, the way he'd stopped doing somewhere around age 12, and apparently hadn't forgotten how. "Get some sleep," she said. "You too." "In a bit." He went to the couch and pulled the throw blanket off the back and was asleep in under 10 minutes. And the specific unconsciousness of a body that had burned through everything it had. She sat at the table and listened to the quiet apartment and the muffled sounds of the city outside the pulled blinds. Dawn was still hours away. The statement could wait for morning. The next afternoon, when it was over, when the federal contact had come and listened carefully and taken her account with a thoroughness that told her it mattered, when Liam was in the hallway with Walt being walked through what the next weeks would look like, when the apartment had shifted from shelter to checkpoint and was about to become simply a memory, she saw Daniel once more. He was standing outside on the sidewalk when she came down, not waiting exactly, just present. He looked like a man who had slept at some point, but not many hours. He looked like a man who had finished something. She stopped beside him. The city moved around them. Afternoon foot traffic, a truck double-parked, someone's music from an open window. The ordinary and relentless machinery of it. "You didn't have to stay," she said. He looked at the street ahead. There was a long pause, not evasive, just real, the pause of someone who was choosing a true answer over a convenient one. "I did," he said quietly. "This time." She understood. She didn't need him to say more, and he didn't offer it. What had happened between a girl named Tanya and a delayed request and 4 lost days was his to carry. She had her own things to carry now, not as heavy and with a better outcome, and, because of him, with the full knowledge of what she'd walked through and come out of. She looked at him sideways. Where do you go from here? He exhaled once, looked at the street. Wherever the next signal is. She nodded. That was who he was. She'd known it since the alley, maybe since before. A man in permanent motion, following something most people couldn't see because most people hadn't learned to look. Then go, she said. He looked at her one last time, that same quiet, calibrating look, final and complete. Then he turned and walked, unhurried, unannounced, absorbing back into the flow of the city the way he'd arrived in the diner. There one moment, gone the next, the space where he'd stood already closing. She watched until he turned the corner, then she turned back to where Liam was waiting and went to him, and they went forward together into the rest of the ordinary, extraordinary day. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories here that deserve to be heard.